Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks. They ain't many teams that are hotter across the country than we see with this South Carolina program. And we're sitting here November 13th, early Wednesday morning, having a legitimate conversation about a pathway for South Carolina to make the 12-team college football playoffs. Now, am I getting up here and saying that I would bet my house that South Carolina makes it into the 12-team playoff? No, probably not, because I think, one, South Carolina needs to take care of their own business. But I think more importantly, they probably need a little bit of help in terms of things shaking out the right way at the top of these rankings. But you make no mistake about it. I think there's a legitimate pathway for South Carolina to get into this conversation, fired up to get into a couple of different things. One, talk about the remaining schedule for South Carolina, what needs to happen there. I also want to get into a conversation of, what do you need at the top of the college football playoff rankings for South Carolina to get into that conversation? And then talk about what makes this South Carolina team so dangerous over the next couple of weeks. And I'll go back to what a South Carolina fan threw in the comments section a couple of days ago. And that is the beauty of South Carolina is you think you have a chance to win every single week. Like, this team is extremely dangerous in terms of how they can run the football and how good this defense is. This is a team that can beat anybody on any given Saturday. And I think that's the most exciting aspect about this South Carolina team. Fired up to get into this conversation. Now, before we do, and as always, a quick shout out to the South Carolina fans. It's been a blast talking this program, and the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas. It's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one now. South Carolina fans, I would love to hear kind of the mood tracker, if you will, from South Carolina fans, because I think there's a lot of optimism about this program going into the back half of November. So let it fly in the comment section. Let's start with the remaining schedule, which I think you love if you're a South Carolina fan. Look, I don't think Missouri is a top 25 team in the country. I don't think a lot of college football fans think they're a top 25 team in the country. But it don't matter what we think about Missouri. It really matters what the College Football Playoff Committee thinks. And the College Football Playoff Committee is telling us they're a top 25 team in the country, coming in at number 23. That is an opportunity for South Carolina to really, kind of send a message. And so you have a top 25 matchup this weekend. If South Carolina can get through that matchup, you're looking at a South Carolina team that's knocking on the door of a top 15 ranking. And then you go on the road to Clemson to finish out the year, another team that will probably be a top 20 team in the country come that matchup. There are two top 25 teams left on this schedule for South Carolina to really bolster this resume in the back half of the season. There's not a lot of other teams that have that opportunity. Now, when you start the season, maybe you want some easier teams. But if you're in a South Carolina situation, you want these matchups. You want the opportunity to bolster your resume and show the College Football Playoff Committee that you're a college football playoff caliber team. And that's exactly what South Carolina has shown over the last couple of weeks. We've seen the College Football Playoff Committee value what have you done for me lately? What is this team looking like lately? And you go back 12 months ago, Florida State gets left out of the college football playoffs with a resume that they certainly should have gotten in. They get left out because they didn't look like a college football playoff team. I think one thing that's working for South Carolina is they haven't lost a game since October 12th, and they are absolutely rolling. And they look to be one of the more dangerous teams in all the country. So if you can kind of finish out this season looking the part, you're going to get in the conversation. Now, I do think it's probably important in terms of how you win these football games. You want to make sure you're sending a statement, because the eyeball test is going to get more and more important over the next couple of weeks. Yeah, it's resume, but we've seen time and time again, the College Football Playoff Committee more kind of leans on that eyeball test. They're willing to look at a resume and say, you might not have the best resume, but you're looking the part in the month of November. We'll put you into the playoffs. We've seen the College Football Playoff Committee do that time and time again. So you're playing Clemson on the road. You get Missouri at home this weekend. If you can send a statement and kind of win these games dominantly, this is a team that is going to be really intriguing in terms of how you talk about South Carolina. Now, I think the second thing is looking at the top of the ranks. What needs to happen for South Carolina? What help can they get? What should we be rooting for if we're a South Carolina fan, I want to start with Texas A&M. You probably want Texas A&M to run the table and beat Texas week 12. Because one, you got the head-to-head against Texas A&M. You got a comfortable head-to-head victory against Texas A&M. If Texas A&M can be a college football playoff team and they're top 10 in the rankings, maybe even top 8 if they can beat Texas week 12, that win looks extremely good. And so, yeah, maybe because they're ahead of you in the rankings, you want them to lose. I don't think that's the case. I think you want them to win out so you can look at the end of the year and say, that's a win that the college football playoff committee is going to look like and say, hey, South Carolina, they kind of showed their damn good football team with that dominant win over Texas A&M. I think secondly, if Texas A&M beats Texas week 12 at home, this Texas team, like, what are they hitching their wagons to in terms of impressive wins? They're number 3 in the country because they have one loss, but there is not a win that Texas has that you're saying that was a damn impressive win. They went on the road and beat Michigan. We thought that was an impressive win early on in the season. Michigan can't score a point. That suddenly doesn't look like an extremely impressive win. Their most impressive win on the season is probably you're talking about maybe a 3-point victory on the road against Vanderbilt, a team that South Carolina just shelled over the weekend. If Texas loses that game to Texas A&M, I think the committee's taking a 9-3 South Carolina team over a Texas team that, yeah, they might be 10-2, but they don't have the wins that South Carolina has. And quite frankly, the 2 times they had an opportunity to play college football playoff teams in Georgia and Texas A&M, they lost them both. I think you're rooting for Texas A&M to run the table, beat Texas week 12. I think South Carolina at the end of that, if they continue to take care of their own business, I think has a real argument to be over Texas. I think the second thing you're probably rooting for is you're looking at number 5 Indiana and saying they're undefeated right now. They're clearly should be in the college football playoffs, but if they play Ohio State in 2 weeks and don't look the part and they get splattered, they get dominated, I think you have a very good chance at jumping Indiana. Because you look at Indiana and say that their resume, they haven't really played a team that is even close to a college football playoff caliber team. You look at Indiana and say the only opportunity that we're going to see Indiana kind of play a college football playoff team is at Ohio State. If they get dominated, if they get blown out, I don't think the committee's going to put Indiana in because they just don't have enough quality wins. I think there's a very good chance that a 9-3 South Carolina team gets in over an 11-1 Indiana team if they get dominated against Ohio State. Now, if Indiana keeps it close, looks like they belong, it's probably hard to see a 9-3 South Carolina team jumping an 11-1 Indiana team. But if they get ran off the football field by Ohio State, at least in my opinion, it's very difficult to see the college football playoff committee taking in Indiana. Now, the next couple of things that I think you're looking at is one, I think there's only one Big 12 team getting in. So Colorado and Kansas State, if they do not win the Big 12 and BYU wins that, BYU stays in there. Colorado drops. South Carolina probably jumps both Colorado and Kansas State. And then you look at the ACC and say Miami losing. That is not good for the ACC either. Because you look at the ACC and say, I think there's, a legitimate argument that there should only be one team in the ACC getting in. That's the ACC champion. And so you look at Miami and SMU and Louisville and saying at the end of the year, South Carolina has a better opportunity to kind of climb the ranks and jump those teams outside of the team that wins the ACC championship. It's kind of shaken out for South Carolina in terms of how these conferences are playing, that there's only one team from the Big 12 getting in. There's only one team from the ACC getting in. And I think you want it to be Miami. Because I think South Carolina, it's going to be harder for South Carolina to jump 12 and, or I should say what, 12-2 Miami Hurricanes team. That's not the right math. 11-2, excuse me, Miami Hurricanes team. But if Louisville goes down, I think you jump SMU, or if SMU or Louisville. I know that got a little, sorry, that got a little convoluted. My thoughts were kind of sporadic. At the end of the day, I think you want Miami to win the ACC, become that ACC champion. And I think at the end of the day, you're looking at SMU, Louisville, and Clemson not getting it. And you're obviously having the opportunity to play Clemson head-to-head in their place at the end of the year. I think the last thing you're probably rooting for is Notre Dame to lose. if Notre Dame loses one more game and they're 10-2, they're not getting into the playoffs. You just look at their resume; they're not going to have good enough wins. They're kind of holding on to that Texas A&M win, but outside of that win, they're not going to have a college football playoff caliber win outside of Week 1 against Texas A&M, and they have a brutal loss against Northern Illinois. And so you look at a couple of these teams, Texas, Notre Dame, Indiana, the ACC teams, the Big 12 teams, and say, if South Carolina continues to handle their business, that they're going to be a team that's in that conversation, no doubt in my mind, come the end of November. And so now you're looking at what needs to happen. Some of those things need to happen. I think if you're South Carolina, you continue to want to play the football you're kind of playing. Lenora Sellers continue to look like a quarterback that's getting better over the year, which we've certainly seen. I mean, he's becoming a playmaker, but not turning the football over. Rocket Sanders now is looking like one of the best running backs in all of the country. He looks like the running back that we remember at Arkansas in 2022. The offensive line is sneakily playing better. And this was a disaster of an offensive line early on in the season. Obviously, starting a true freshman at left tackle, which was Isaiah Thompson. I thought Tree came in, played some really good football. I look at the offensive line and say it's getting better. I look at the quarterback room, say it's getting better. Rocket Sanders looks better. The defense continues to be elite. This is a South Carolina team that when I go the checklist in terms of the eyeball test, I'm starting to check off a lot of boxes. They're going to have and again, there's some other teams you look at, maybe a team like LSU sitting there at 2022. I just don't know if there's enough opportunity on their schedule to go kind of build that resume in the back half of November. I look at South Carolina and say playing a top 25 Missouri team, then going on the road to play Clemson. You want those games. You want those opportunities to kind of show your college football playoff caliber team. They're going to have those opportunities when a lot of other teams don't. We'll see how it shakes out for South Carolina. But with these rankings coming out and seemingly how they evaluate teams in the ACC and the Big 12, we're going to be having this conversation towards the end of November. Now, the number one important thing is control what you can control. That is winning football games every single Saturday. Missouri this weekend. Send a message. South Carolina's 13.5 point favorite in that football game. Go cover the spread. Go beat a top 25 team by double-digit points and kind of show the message. Because this eyeball, winning might not be enough. You might need to send some messages and kind of pass the eyeball test as well. Continue to do what you're doing. And I think South Carolina is going to have a real conversation about being in that college football playoffs. We'll sign it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.